Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I have the pleasure of speaking with Darshana Patel. Darshana studied psychology at Loyola University in Chicago and completed a master's degree after that in occupational therapy at the University of Illinois in Chicago. She currently works as a user experience researcher at DemocracyLab. So welcome, Darshana. And let's begin with how you found your way in user experience research, this general field. How did you find it? How did you kind of started to identify with it?
Totally. Thank you so much again for having me today.
You?
But my path to UX research was very non-traditional, which I feel like a lot of people that actually transition or come into the field, they often have non-traditional paths. And so, like you kind of mentioned, I did graduate from my master's in occupational therapy last year. And it's so crazy that honestly, not even a year later, I'm transitioning to something different. But it was kind of towards the end of my school, I was like, oh man, oh man. I was kind of having a quarter life crisis. I was just like, what do I want to do? I felt like everybody in my cohort kind of knew the setting they wanted to work in. And I enjoyed a lot of different settings. I loved my neuro rehab. I loved the schools and I loved my hand therapy clinic. But I was just like, dang, nothing seemed like a good fit for me personally. And so worst timing, but when I was studying for the NBCOT exam, which is our credentialing exam, I was like, all right, let me do some research. So I looked up some non-traditional paths for occupational therapists. And one of the ones that kind of popped up, obviously, was user experience research. And I was like, oh my God, what? I was like, I've never heard of that before. And so I kind of dug a little bit deeper and read a little bit more about it. And I was like, oh my God, I saw so many parallels between occupational therapy and user experience, honestly, just in general, with research and design. And I read some rehab professionals that actually did make the transition successfully. And, I was still studying for my NBCOT exam. I didn't even get licensed at that time. And I was like, all right, maybe I'm not ready quite yet to make that jump. So I did practice as an occupational therapist just for a short period of time. And I just could not get UX out of my head. It was just kept coming back. And so I started taking more LinkedIn courses. And then in the beginning of the year, I was like, all right, I have to do I cannot get it out. And once I commit to something, I'm fully invested and I just knew I was committed. And so then after that, I started volunteering with Democracy Lab, like you mentioned, and then also just finished up another apprenticeship with Inclusive through Tech Fleet. And I was like, all right, I'm fully in. So still finding my way to a full-time role within UX research, but I'm getting a lot of experience throughout the way.
Mhm. Could you say a few words about what it was that you couldn't get out of your head as you described? Was it like an anticipation of it will be a really good fit for you? Was it
Yeah.
because you thought you would have maybe a different kind of impact, more widespread impact? What was it? I'm curious to hear a bit more on that.
No, that's a great question. And I think it was because I would have a very different impact. When I was reading about UX research, I saw a lot of similarities, like I mentioned, between occupational therapy and UX. And it was kind of cool because I love love everything that I learned in OT school. And I still wanted that to play a factor in whatever role that I did. And so with UX research, I liked the fact that it can be done in a tech field. I think tech is always a growing field. And I feel occupational therapists, they just have such a unique lens that they can bring to within the tech field and making sure that basically products are usable by all individuals, taking into consideration all abilities. And I felt like doing it in the tech field would be huge because let's be real, we're always on our phones, we're always on websites, we're always interacting with things. So making sure that we take that inclusive design and universal design, everything into perspective. And I just felt like it was just a great fit for me.
Mhm, mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to use an analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, but it's something that came to my mind. When I was doing my graduate work in psychology, in experimental psychology, I kind of felt like it was not as flexible, not as wide, not as open as what I wanted to do. And so I started to read more philosophical texts. And I realized that philosophy is that bigger space. And what I was doing in psychology is a small part of that, but I really want to do that general thing. I want to be in that general topic. And it seems like occupational therapy is a subset of user experience, the field of user experience, and you kind of wanted to expand and explore that wider space. And it was like your original position was still a subset of that. Would that be fair?
Dude, that was like perfect. That was like the clearest answer. Yes, exactly. That was
Great,
that.
great. Sorry, my cat started to participate in the interview too,
You're good.
as he does usually. So I really like that you were open to kind of training, exploring, signing up for, I don't know what different kinds of training and internship you signed up for, and you kind of put yourself into. So I think you have a general idea about this user experience field. I want to see how you describe your unique position in it. How, for example, what are some of the UX research types of projects that other people are doing that are different from you, and vice versa? What is it that you do that some other people are not doing? So that kind of clarifying that distinct position that you have now.
Yeah, that's a good question. So obviously I'm still very new to the field, but I feel like through like my experience with like inclusive and even at DemocracyLab, I kind of see how my past experiences kind of like that whole lens thing like kind of come into play, and how I have like a little bit of a different lens when it comes to it. So one of the big things was like flexibility is incredibly important in understanding like the field, and like when like, you're practicing in the field. And as an OT student, I was always taught your sessions are never going to go as planned. And so like that was literally embedded in my head. And so we were always taught, you know what, you always have to have a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. You like literally we were taught to like create upgrades, which is like making tasks harder, or like downgrades, making tasks easier, and like how we are going to modify. And yes, we do have a plan, obviously, and we do like require flexibility within the moment, but that honestly came into play in like my user interviews. I remember I was talking to one of my other researchers, and I was like, oh my God, what happens if he has internet issues? Like we have no idea, like we don't know anything about him. And so I was like, you know what, whatever, I'll just give him like a phone call. I'll still record the conversation like we've planned, and then I'll just have it be via phone call, and then you can still listen in. And that is like exactly what happened. He was having internet issues. And so I was like really grateful that I kind of planned beforehand. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to give him a phone call. So in the moment, I was like calm and collected. And to be honest, if I probably didn't think about it, because I was trying to be like a perfect UX researcher when I was like, you know, doing my apprenticeship, I would have probably been a little bit stressed. But in that moment, like everything was totally fine, and it did move the session along. So I feel like kind of my background kind of came into play. And I think a lot of people know you have to be flexible, but I felt like just having that experience beforehand and like knowing that I had to plan beforehand really like helped run like the session smoothly. And then another one I feel like is, you know, user experience research is like obviously a very user-centered field. And like, I think, you know, coming from like my background where like we always advocate for all individuals to be able to participate in the things that they want to participate. And so I think in user experience research, you know, you obviously have that target user group that you are often trying to like communicate with. But I think like from based off my past experiences, and even like what I was doing with inclusive, was like we were often like trying to advocate also for individuals that, you know what, may have impairments like visual impairments or intellectual disabilities, and making sure that like their voices are also heard, that like we understand their needs, their experiences with the website and things like that. And so I feel like that's a unique perspective that I think that I can bring into the field. So yeah.
So we can say something, a keyword that is in social science very commonly used is looking at the center versus the margins of an activity. What is happening at the margins with people who are maybe are interested in joining in, but for whatever reason cannot.
Exactly.
And at least paying attention to them and including their voices into this, into the ongoing activity. For people who are, you know, they hear you, they hear your excitement and might be interested in getting into the field of UX research.
Yeah.
What are a couple of or some of the basic assumptions or principles that you would encourage them to know, to be mindful of?
Totally. So I think one of the big things, especially when you're going into user experience research, is just like getting familiar with the different methodologies. Like Davood, you probably also know, like there's like so many like qualitative and quantitative methodologies, but just like getting familiar and also like most importantly, getting practice in them. So like through volunteering or just like doing like freelance work, whatever the case may be. But I think even taking it a step further, especially for people that are trying to transition into the field like myself, recognizing that, you know, some of the things that you do or that you did in like your previous profession may honestly be applicable to UX research. Like, for example, we often do like what we call analysis of occupational performance, which is like basically observing our client doing a task. And that is like similar to contextual inquiry in user experience research. And then also just like, I always kept calling things like semi-structured interviews because that's what I learned in OT, but that's like moderated and user interviews in UXR. So just like getting comfortable with the terminology in UX research and starting to transition to using that terminology. Because I remember when I was like first getting into it, I was like, I kept putting semi-structured interviews in like my resume and people are like, what is that? Is that just like moderated interviews? I'm like, yes. And they're like, then maybe you should use that terminology. I'm like, yes, you're right. So like just getting familiar with the terminology, recognizing the similarities between your previous profession and UXR. And then also another thing is like, you know, you always hear how important empathy is in UX research. Like you are definitely trying to understand the needs of the users. But I think taking it a step further is like communication and interpersonal skills are also so vital in UX research and just like really like honing in on those skills. Like the users at the end of the day, they are people, and like you want to be able to like have a personality and show that personality when you're talking to people, right? If they're joking, like, you know, you can always like joke with them, like have a good time with it, have fun with it, but still like having that communication style. So we were always taught like therapeutic use of self, which is like having different modes ready and like transitioning between different modes based off of the individual that you're talking to. And so like, how are you going to react when somebody comes in and they're, you know, like they're angry or they're hurt by the system and they don't understand how your product is going to help them? How are you going to navigate that situation where you allow that individual to feel heard and like in a non-judgmental environment, but still like move on with like the session? Like, how are you going to navigate both? So I think that is a skill on its own. And I know it's more of a softer skill, but like, I think it's so vital to recognize that you're going to meet a lot of different personalities in this field and just like being comfortable with navigating all of them.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Often when I think about softer skills or soft skills, it's not that they are soft and they don't kind of have an impact on the world at like hard skills really do
Yeah.
things, but it's more like the way we formalize them and we kind of try to train them, that language that in which they are spoken and we try to train each other is a very soft. It's like writing on the sand on a beach, and it becomes like the moment you talk about a soft skill, you realize that I'm not doing justice to it because there's more to it. It's so complex and it's so embodied that it is difficult to write about it and give it like a step-by-step instructions of it. So I really like what you said about being flexible, trying to get your hands dirty as soon as possible, like getting into an internship or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Because you learn a lot of skills while you're there too. Like when you're starting to interact with those users, you kind of learn a lot of different skills in that moment as well.
Right. Right. Um, how about possible misconceptions or misunderstandings of UX research? Any that you would want to point out that are crucial to clarify?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question because I was
Thank you.
thinking about it recently too. I'm like, what are some misconceptions that I've had? And one of the big ones that I've had was like, you know, user experience research like needs to yield like shocking results each time. And that's just totally not the case. Um, like, for example, when I was working with Inclusive, we were kind of like hearing similar thoughts that we had before we even spoke to the users. And I think that it's important to know that like sometimes those results that you get, they're just going to validate what you already know, but
Mhm.
that doesn't mean that it's not important to still have those validations. And it may not always yield those big results that like everybody's expecting, but like that they're still going to yield important results. And then another big misconception that I think is there is that like, you should ask the users like what they want or like what features they want to see. And I don't think that people in general have a very good idea of what they want or what they're going to use in the future, because I just don't think that they know. And I remember when I was working on a project once that we were kind of taking notes that this is what users want to see, like, and like we were kind of including it. And I'm just like, why? I'm like, we don't even know if
Mm.
they're going to use that feature if it's added to our site. And I don't want to like also add something or like talk about adding something when it could negatively impact like the whole process. And so like just noting that maybe don't ask the users necessarily kind of what they want or what they want to see in like a website or a product.
Mhm, mhm. Because by doing that, you're kind of including the users into the design process,
Right.
which is not the UX research process. It's because designers themselves have this in advance planning, and they have an imagination of what it would be like. And users themselves, before using something, before participating in an activity, we might also have an imagined scenario in mind that might be proven wrong in the actual situation. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And like just even if you were to like take it forward and like run with the idea of like what a user wanted, like again, like you also have to consider like the business needs and the stakeholder needs. And if you were to like go in a direction that like, people weren't going to use that, it can negatively impact the business. And so just making sure that you have a good understanding of that as well.
Yeah, yeah, great. I really like both of your points about possible misunderstandings. One, that people don't necessarily always know what it is that they want or need. The other one is the huge impact, the expectations, because as you said, sometimes what we need is a simple course correction or just remaining on the course, and a confirmation that things are happening uh, as we want, and just having that confirmation, as opposed to like something that we were missing is we become aware of it in a drastic way.
Exactly.
Yeah, great. um, Now I want to ask you also about uh, what kind of projects you're working on. So I leave it up to you. You could, if you like, you could talk about the Democracy Lab, which I'm really curious about, or you could also talk in addition, or as an alternative, talk about the future of your path. How do you envision your work as a UX researcher into the
Yeah.
future?
So I'll talk about both because I like love
Great,
them both.
great.
But for Democracy Lab, so Democracy Lab, it basically connects volunteers to like tech for good projects. So on their site, which I think everybody should always look into Democracy Lab, I think it's a great site, but Democracy Lab has a lot of projects from like different organizations like Orcasound to Clear Eviction. And so as a user experience researcher, what I'm working with is like specifically with external volunteers. So like those are volunteers that go on the website, on the Democracy Lab website, and they basically go and work for like another project. And we kind of want to get an understanding of, do they still engage with the site with Democracy Lab like after they join a project, and basically how we can have them still participate and use the site even after they join a project, and also just increase or make it easier for like the whole onboarding process, because we kept hearing about how hard it was to onboard and just like get started on a project. So we're also working on that. So it's really cool because we just kind of finished more of our qualitative research and we're about to present on that soon. So I'm super excited to do that. But also just in terms of like how I envision my path as a user experience researcher. So like I kind of mentioned earlier, I'm still transitioning into the field. So obviously I like, now that I have some experience and I feel more confident talking about it, I kind of now want to obviously land a full-time role within UX research. But before I even started OT school, I always like was set on the fact that I wanted to be a lifelong learner wherever life took me. And so even as a UX researcher, even when I enter the field, whenever that may be, I do plan on continuing to learn and grow within the field, because I think that there's so much left to learn, and you're always constantly learning from other people, especially when other people are entering the field too, and they bring such different insights. Like I want to learn from like literally everybody. So like continuing to learn even when I do become a UX researcher, and then also eventually, you know, as time goes on, moving into more of a senior position in UX. So that's kind of my plan for now.
Great. And I wish you the best of luck. And based on what I hear, I think I have very little doubts that you would succeed.
Thank you.
So, and I look forward to keeping in touch and knowing what other great things you will do.
Thank you.
Okay, please stay in the Zoom. As I stop the recording, we will say our own goodbye. But thank you very much, and looking forward to our future conversations.
Sounds good.